Hello and welcome to the Hoop Collective podcast. We talk about the NBA, which we are doing on Thursday. In our next phase of our summer series we're going to talk about the NBA in certain ways. How do you want me to say it? We're killing time. We thought we would do something we haven't done before, although we've sort of done it unofficially, which is to discuss the most intriguing people in the NBA in the upcoming 24-25 season. You can frame that any way you want, but basically it means players, it means coaches, it means agents, it means owners, whoever. And the most important thing is it's not going to be a snake draft. That's, I think, that was the one thing that I set it down. So, all right, Bontemps. Why don't you go?
We're not doing any intros today?
You're right.
Wow.
I'm off because it's early in the day. It's earlier than normal. Joining me from Clear Lake, California, Tim Bontemps.
Hello, everybody.
And joining me from Dallas, Texas, back home on the range, Ben MacMahon.
Howdy, partners. Wendy, we missed you out there at the lake. Would have been just a swell time. You missed Bontemps waterfalling a fireball shot. It was quite an event.
Wow, it's like back in the St. Bonaventure days.
It was impressive.
Are you a regular drinker of Fireball in your mid to late 30s, Bontemps?
No.
It's like that was one of those things that was one of the starter drinks, Fireball. I mean, what about you, MacMahon? Are you a regular consumer of Fireball at this juncture?
I drink no liquor whatsoever, but I definitely was encouraging old Tipsy.
Oh, that I believe. By the way, both of you in your day, having seen a little bit of it, could drink. It's no longer your day. So it would have been interesting to see you guys pass. Oh, you don't, you think it's still your day, MacMahon?
I didn't say anything.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't say anything either. No comments.
All right.
No comments across the board.
All right. Most intriguing, your first man up or woman, Mr. Bontemps.
Oh, I was not expecting that. I'm gonna cheat a little and combine two people into one because I think they fit in the exact same bucket, which is LaMelo Ball and Trae Young. 2 point guards in the Southeast, 2 guys who a couple years ago, their stock was really soaring. And Trae Young getting the Hawks to the conference finals. LaMelo Ball making the All-Star game in his second year. We talked about him recently on the pod a little bit. And I think it's sort of a crossroads season for both of those guys. You have a whole new regime in Charlotte, new GM and Jeff Peterson, new coach in Charles Lee, new ownership group, basically I think about a year and a half in now with Gabe Plotkin and Rich Schnall.
But basically this is their first year.
This is their first year.
Yeah.
They're starting fresh, and looks like Brandon Miller was a really good pick last year. He had a great rookie year. Would have won rookie of the year in a lot of years when there isn't a unicorn, once in a generation player in it, in Victor Wembanyama. But you look at where LaMelo's at with the injuries he's had the last couple of years. MacMahon talked about some of the questions about his defense and whether he can be a guy that can generate a lot of winning. You look at Trae Young, all the stuff that's gone on in Atlanta. Obviously, they trade DeJounte Murray this summer. They've turned over a lot of that roster. They draft Zachary Richichet with the first pick. They've hired a new coach the last couple of years. They have a new front office. It just feels like for both of those guys, we're kind of at a point where there's either going to be steps towards going in the right direction from a winning standpoint in the places they're at, or you're really going to have to start to wonder if both of them are going to be long-term fits where they're at. And also, when you look around the league, and we've talked about this before, and you look at how many teams there are that have point guards right now, there's just a real question of, okay, like how valuable are offense first, very bad defense point guards like Trae Young and LaMelo Ball in today's NBA. And so I think for both of those guys, it's going to be really interesting to see how this season progresses for them and where we think of them this time, or I guess next off season, as opposed to now, and what that means for the trajectory of their careers.
So I don't know if the Hawks would ever say this publicly, but I think they knew that they had to break up DeJounte Murray and Trae Young, and the player that they could trade for value was DeJounte Murray. I'm sure there was lots of different pieces of nuance involved in how they went about that, but I'm not sure that Trae Young's value is as high as they'd like it to be. So this is a real pivotal year, as you say, for Trae Young. Number one, after this season, he can extend his contract. And in the current environment, first off, we know that he's on the fun max. We know the next contract is stress max time. It's been dubbed the stress max because it affects both sides. Sometimes it's the stress on the team, whether they can get the player to sign, and sometimes it's the stress on the player about whether he can get that second max. And in this environment where, under the new rules, where you've got to watch the dollars being spent, especially when you get to the 30% part of the 30% max, Trae's going to have a big year, even if it's to stay in Atlanta and sign a max. And then it's, is it going to be in Atlanta? Is that where they're going to be? So, he has continued to have good seasons. He's developed into one of the best playmaking point guards in the league. Averaged 11 assists last year. Is setting various records for his point assist doubles that he has. Made the All-Star team last season. But has not translated into the type of player that can elevate his team. I think right now, if you said, what kind of player is Trae Young? I think a fair way to say it is he is a incredibly talented offensive player who's very limited defensively, if he's your best player, you're a play-in team. Mm-hmm. That's what the Hawks have been. Now, I know that a couple of years ago, they did make the conference finals, and that's what a Trae Young defender would say. But I'm not sure that is not really more the outlier than the rule. So I think Trae Young is a great name for this list, Bontemps.
Well, yeah, and listen, Trae definitely had some big time moments during that playoff run. I mean, the guy's bowing at midcourt at Madison Square Garden. He's had play-in games too, where he's not scared of the moment. That's for sure. He loves the stage. But if Trae Young's your best player, I think it's going to be tough to get to the stage very often. And I mean, you hit it. The simple fact of the matter is, if there was a real market for Trae Young, he'd be somewhere else right now. It's not like they got some kind of wild blockbuster return for DeJounte Murray. I mean, it was okay, but it wasn't anything comparable to some of the other star trades that
it was a bet against the Lakers. That's not, Dyson Daniels is an interesting young piece, but basically they wagered with the Lakers' unprotected pick this year. In this draft, they wagered against the Lakers. That was part of what that trade was about.
Yeah, but listen, like the San Antonio Spurs, if they wanted Trae Young, they easily could have gone and gotten him. And that wasn't even a bet on Trae Young as your best player. That was Trae Young as your second best player. So again, there wasn't a real market for Trae Young, and he doesn't necessarily need to reestablish a trade market for himself. But as you said, as extension talks are coming, I think he does have to reestablish his value. But honestly, it's a bad situation in Atlanta because the Hawks are in a position where they should be entering what would hopefully be a kind of a rapid rebuild, but they can't because the Spurs have all their draft capital.
That's right.
So they're in this awkward situation where, they should be unloading more pieces, but it's just not something that, you can't bottom out to make the Spurs better. It just doesn't make any kind of sense.
It's not exactly the same as the Westbrook trade because that was coming off of a team that had won a championship in LA. But that Westbrook trade really to this day is having lingering effects on the Lakers.
Mm-hmm.
And that DeJounte Murray trade is going to have an effect on the Hawks for a long time.
Listen, the James Harden trade had effect on the Nets, and then they finally.
The James Harden trades haven't even sunk their teeth in yet.
And then they finally.
That's coming.
They mostly dug their way out of that, although the Rockets do still have one first-round asset from that Harden trade, in addition to all the stuff they parlayed into the future Sun stuff. But the Nets had to go get most of their draft capital back to put themselves in a position where they could bottom out. And so the Hawks are in this miserable purgatory situation where there's no point other than try to be as competitive as possible, but as competitive as possible, like you said, Bontemps is, I think, probably high side a play-in situation. And then, the LaMelo Ball thing, I said what I said a couple podcasts ago. Our aggregator friends made sure that was heard loud. The only thing I'll add is I did get some feedback from some of our scouting pals around the league, and
They didn't agree with Wendy's defense assessment.
Nobody.
I was saying he can be a better defender.
Nobody told me that I was wrong. I'll put it like that.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I think the biggest difference between LaMelo and Trae is obviously just the size. And so, LaMelo defensively, he is at least active as an off-ball defender. He does get steals. LaMelo's defensive strength is a little bit like Luka's, and that is they're big enough to hide on multiple positions, right? And then they are smart. If they're engaged, they can be, helpful off-ball defenders. Luka obviously is a bull who, can bang, can rebound, all that kind of stuff. But whereas Trae, it's tough. It's tough to hide Trae on a power forward.
Yeah, I mean that's the whole thing. It's going to be very interesting for both of them.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm going to go next here, and I'm going to sort of jump in because it links. We already referenced him, but one of my most intriguing guys is James Harden.
Mm-hmm.
So to remind you, Harden signed a 2-year, $70 million contract with the Clippers, a shorter contract and lesser than I'm sure he was envisioning. The amount of money that Harden has turned down. Well, one thing I can say for sure is that he had offers on the table to be making, I think, over $60 million this year. If you go all the way back to the Brooklyn Nets.
Well, he would have been making what Kevin is making this year, right? Wouldn't he been on the same contract? Because they would have been on the same extension cycle, and Kevin's at 51, right?
Right. Okay. So it would have been 60 this year. I remember that he would have been on a $60 million contract. So it would have been later. But had he taken that extension, he would have headed towards 60 million. So he'd have been at 50 this year. He's making 35. That's just for this year. Obviously, the last 2 years, he took less when he re-signed with the Sixers. So the amount of money that he's already left on the table the last 2 years is 8 figures. And then he's in eight figures this year from what he could have had. I'm not going to go into the details. The point is that Harden, by his contractual terms, has really left a lot on the table.
He now can still cover the tab at the club.
I understand that. I'm not saying he's having trouble making his mortgage. The other thing is, I'm not sure who was coming with an offer. Anything close to this. That's
interesting. Yeah.
Like the Clippers, again, part of the fascinating summer of the Clippers was they absolutely were aware of what Paul George's market was, and then went one direction. I mean, they may end up being correct in that. A short term, I think it's going to hurt them. They may end up looking okay, not guaranteeing him. I'm sure he wanted 5 years, but certainly not guaranteeing him the 4 years because that wasn't even on the table. Then they give Harden 2 and 70 without a market, at least like this. So they were giving it to him for what reason? To be nice guys? I'm not sure. So it brings into focus what's expected from Harden this year. Also, we have a new interview with Ty Lue, Clippers coach, with our Om Young-Masuk that came out, I believe it came out Wednesday. Mm-hmm. An excellent story on Ty and the Clippers. And Ty basically says, we're going to prove people wrong. People are making assumptions about us. We're going to prove people wrong. Okay. Ty is an excellent coach. I think he's got the potential to be absolutely one of the best coaches of this era. We'll see. And if you're going to prove people wrong, then you better get a great year from James Harden. Now, James Harden did lead the NBA in assists last year. is because I think Trae Young actually averaged more, but he didn't. I'm not sure if he didn't have enough.
2 years ago.
Oh,
2 years ago.
22-23.
When Joel won MVP.
Right.
Yeah.
This is the number on James Harden that I want to highlight. In 21-22, well, if you want to go all the way back to 1920, he averaged 12 free throws a game. 2021, 7 free throws a game. 21-22, 8 free throws a game. 22-23, 6 free throws a game. 23-24, 4.8 free throws a game. Now, I realize that over the last year or so, there's been some variance in the way officials are whistling things. And some of the dark arts that Harden was, elite at in 1920 when he was getting 12 free throws a game are no longer getting the fouls. But that drop-off is alarming. Now, look, he's 34 years old. Actually, take that back. 3 days ago, he turned 35.
Yeah.
So, that's the arc of a career. But that's the Harden secret sauce, is the step back and getting to the line.
Well, here's the deal.
Yeah.
He's half the scorer he used to be. He's half the scorer that he was 5 years ago. And he was arguably the best ISO player, certainly of this generation. I mean, statistically, you can make an argument of whatever. Daryl Morey went and said he was a better scorer than Jordan, whatever. 3 straight years, 30 plus, 5 straight years, 29 plus. The last year of that was his 3rd straight year leading the league at 34.3 points per game. Last year was 16.6. Again, less than half that. His shot attempts per game have gone down from, in 1920, the man took 22 plus shots a game. Last year, he took a little bit more than 11.
Right.
3.2.
That's also a function of his who he's been playing with. I mean,
well, that's the story to me. All these things are true. His usage rate has gone down. His shot attempts have gone down. His free throws have gone down, right? All of that's been because of where he's been. He was on a Nets team where he's playing with Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant, 2 guys that are going to shoot the ball a ton. He goes to Philadelphia. He's obviously playing with Joel Embiid, who's leading the league in scoring. He's playing with Tyrese Maxey, who's getting up a ton of shots, right? But paying him this money, the Clippers losing Paul George, they're obviously going into the toilet bowl. They want to have a big year in the first year in the new building. The Steve Ballmer's built. Just had the Bruno Mars concert a couple weeks ago. Owen was at that. They're going to open up a couple months here, start of the new season. And the bet here is that if you have Kawhi Leonard and James Harden, and by the way, a bunch of other guys who can't really dribble, like the ball's going to be back in James Harden's hands all the time. By paying him that money, they clearly wanted to have him happy, have him on the team, and bet that he could put up big numbers for them and have them still be a playoff caliber team in a loaded Western Conference. That was the bet. And it's going to be fascinating to see if James Harden can ramp that up or if he's got to ease back and he's not a guy who can get more than 14, 15 shots a game up anymore. And he can't get more than 7, 8 free throws a game. Because if he can't, he's not going to be worth that money and the Clippers aren't going to make the playoffs.
They need him. I'm not saying they need him to average 34 a game. I'm not saying they need him to lead the league in scoring, but they need him to be a potent scorer again. And look, there's no doubt James Harden can run an offense. Like James Harden's one of the best facilitators in the league. Can he consistently be, I'm going to say like a 25 point per game score anymore? They need that. And by the way, they needed that from him last year in the playoffs when Kawhi either was out or wasn't himself. They got it twice. Game 1, he scored 28. They won. Game 4, he scored 33. They won. He averaged 16 and change the rest of the series, including 7 in game 5. And if he didn't score 28 or 33, they lost the rest of the games. I think he's going to have to be an at least all-star caliber scorer this year.
Well, the one thing is he's generally always been able to play. He's been generally healthy. I think, he had the hamstring issue 2 years ago that really bothered him. He did play 72 games last year, and he did average 34 minutes a game. And Westbrook isn't there anymore to worry about splitting time with. They traded Westbrook for Chris Dunn. Chris Dunn is their new backup point guard. So Chris Dunn is not an offensive player.
Right.
So the minutes are going to be there. He's going to get the minutes. He's going to get the shots. You say, you point out he only averaged 11 shots. That number's going back up.
Yeah, I mean, just listen to their roster. I mean, Norm Powell shoots the ball, but I mean, Ivica Zubac not going to shoot it a ton. Terrence Mann not going to shoot it a ton. Derek Jones not going to shoot it a ton. Chris Dunn not going to shoot it a ton. Nick Batum not going to shoot it a ton. Like, they got a bunch of guys who are essentially going to stand there and catch passes from James Harden and shoot threes around him and Kawhi. And, obviously Kawhi's going to miss games. So James is going to have the ability to eat as much as he wants offensively. And to MacMahon's point, he hasn't scored 25 points a game in 5 years. To me, if he could be a 25-point-a-game scorer, then the Clippers can do what Ty Lue said and surprise people. If he can't, it's going to be hard for their offense to be good enough for them to be a real threat in, as we've talked about many times, what's a really loaded West.
All right, MacMahon, you're up.
Harden was actually on my list as well.
I know, I jumped in. I cut you in line.
That's okay. I am going to go with another point guard in the Western Conference, a guy we've talked about a little bit, but Jamal Murray. And, this one's pretty obvious. Like, hey, Jamal Murray a couple of years ago during the Nuggets championship run played at a superstar level. And the Nuggets need that kind of performance from him to be a true championship threat again this year. After the offseason they've had, obviously they're counting on Christian Brown to fill a void there in the starting lineup. They're hoping on the development of some of their young players. But as great as Joker is, he needs a co-star, and he needs Jamal Murray to get back to that level after a pretty rocky playoff run, despite hitting a couple of game winners. And then obviously what we saw this summer from him with Canada was not encouraging. Josh Kroenke came out and basically said he's playing through stuff. Well, that's concerning as well. A guy who's had injury history, wasn't healthy this summer and didn't get a lot of rest. When you talk about concerns with the Nuggets, you talk about the departures in the roster, but then also whether Jamal Murray can perform at the level that it required for the Nuggets to make a championship run.
Yeah, I mean, so the contract, to me, it's one of those elephants in the room. And we still have 6 weeks before training camp, but if he's not extended, regardless of what anything wants to say, that's a vote of no confidence.
And it lingers.
You can explain it. You can give a 13-point PowerPoint presentation about why this makes sense and everything's fine, and he could make all NBA still, and everybody can put a nice face on it, and he can say he doesn't care or whatever. That's a point of that's a potentially rough situation, and this is one of those things that can affect a player and affect a team lingering. And I'm not even arguing that the Nuggets should do it. I'm just saying it's out there.
Would you guys sign him to a max extension?
I've said it many times. I would not, coming off of what I saw in the playoffs and in the Olympics. And again, yes, he was hurt. Well, that's part of the issue is, unfortunately, the guy has a very significant injury history. Last year had major hamstring problems. Obviously had the knee injury that knocked him out for a year and a half. He hadn't played over 65 games since he was 21 years old in 2019.
So here's the number. It's $208 million over 4 years. It's $52 million a year.
A lot of money.
You guys know my standard on this is if you sign a guy to a contract, Can you trade the guy the next day? If they sign Jamal Murray to that contract today, I don't think they could trade him tomorrow.
You'd be right in the same boat as Trae Young and these other guys we've talked about. Like, he's a very good player, but I don't think he's probably not one of the 10 best point guards in the league. And he's coming off these injuries. And again, it's like, this is the situation the Nuggets are in. It's going to be fascinating. It's going to be really fascinating to see how he plays and how this situation plays out, not only over the next couple months, but over this season. I mean, they've, as we've talked about, they've got a ton of pressure on them as an organization after the way last year ended, and then pass it on KCP this summer. Like, they made a lot of bets on themselves, and we'll see what happens.
One of the popular things to say about Jamal Murray right now is, how key he is, to be around Jokic, and that, people are like, well, when Jamal Murray's not around Jokic, he doesn't have the same pop. And that was one of the things that this summer was showing. If he's not 100%, you can't really judge him. But the other side of that is, when he's around Jokic, they're a championship team. So you're talking about a two-man situation that is proven to be a championship team. And that is not something
right
that is
role players around them.
Correct. No, but that's true. That's true for any championship team.
Finishing pieces from that championship puzzle are gone.
I agree. And that's why I do think there's one other thing to point out here, which is that there's not a deadline to sign this extension. It's not like other times when a player has to extend by a certain date early in the season, or he can't.
Yeah, on the last year of your deal, you can sign all the way to June 30th.
Right. So they can sit there and watch how this season plays out and make the decision later.
That's what I would do.
But I would say that appears to be the way it's going. But the one thing I would just say also, one of the lessons I've learned and watched in contract negotiations is it's very effective in the NBA when you're a star, even if you're not a star level player, even if you're a high level role player. Part of leverage is the lack of ability to be replaced.
Yeah.
And if Jamal Murray isn't a Nugget in a year, who's filling that role?
And by the way, Aaron Gordon's on the last year of his deal. He's got a player option after this year, and he's in a very similar situation.
Yeah, there's actually a list, and we'll talk closer to training camp, because right now most of the league is on vacation. There's a list of players who have these extensions that are sort of not being discussed. For example, Rudy Gobert. Now he has a player option for next season at $47 million. Do I think he's not picking that up? No. But Rudy Gobert is sitting there extension eligible going the last year of his contract.
Julius Randle, another guy.
Julius Randle is going to be the guy that I was going to pick next for most intriguing.
Well, there you go. Pick him now. Let's just talk about it.
I'm jumping out of turn here.
Oh, we're snaking. We're snaking back and forth.
Oh, Wendy loves a good snake draft.
I just backed into the snake trap.
Oh.
The venomous snake bites Wendy.
Oh, God.
Julius, a great name, though. Let's go.
All right. Sort of a forgotten gentleman in this remarkable Knicks last 4 months. He got hurt in, was it January? He played 46 games.
January 27th. He and OG Anunoby both got hurt against the Heat, and OG played a little bit, and Julius never played again.
And, Randle was an all-star last year, and has been a rock in dark times or sort of uncertain times for the Knicks. He has been.
He was the guy that started the turnaround. I mean, he made All NBA, won Most Improved Player that first year they made the playoffs under Tom Thibodeau. I mean, Tim mentioned it when they lost to the Hawks in the first round. Like, I mean, Julius had a good year, got them in the playoff. Like, that was what started the momentum to lead to all this other stuff.
A very attractive about $29 million this year. His player option for next season is $31 million. His value, if he's 100%, is more than that. That is, there is no reason why, if he's playing at the top of his game, why he shouldn't seriously consider opting out of that. So that's the question. What is his role going to be in terms of how he fits into the Nova Knicks? And why is there something that you can work on there. He didn't become eligible to sign the contract extension until this month. He is, according to Bobby Marks, he worked all this out. He's eligible for a 4-year, $181 million extension. So it's, a significant number. It's not the max, but it's a significant number. 45 a year. However, the Knicks have to be careful with their salary commitments because of Anunoby. And even though Brunson is a huge discount, that's a big salary on there. And they're going to have to extend Mikal Bridges as well. That's going to get done for what they paid him, even though that's apparently going to potentially be a bargain extension if he does something similar to what Brunson did. So how he fits into this heavy wing lineup, how big his role is, all of those things, Bontemps fits this intriguing label for sure.
Yeah, I mean, look, the contract extension situation is interesting. The fit on the roster is interesting. We've talked about how they're short at center. Julius, is both a really good player, and if they're going to move pieces around, is probably the main piece that they would move around in a deal if they need to reorient the roster, because they're not trading any of the 4 Villanova guys, you would think, barring something crazy happening. So, yeah, I mean, it's going to be, the Knicks are going to be a intriguing team for many reasons this year. And obviously everyone in New York is extraordinarily excited about where they're at, but the future of Julius Randle is one of the more interesting questions in the whole league for all the reasons you laid out. And it certainly will come up a lot as the season starts, if he hasn't signed an extension yet. And it'll be interesting as the season plays out, because anytime the Knicks have any sort of issue, that's the first thing people are going to say. And they're going to be looking at is Julius fitting in with this group? Who are the Knicks starting? How is this looking? Could they move pieces around and have it make more sense?
Yeah, and because of that $29 million, because that $29 million salary, he's extraordinarily tradable. And the Knicks still do have a couple of extra first round, not extra, there's no extra anymore, but the Knicks do still have a couple of first round picks
they can move.
That they can move.
Yeah. The one thing I would say about the possibility of moving Randle is I think you need to get some playmaking in return, because Jalen Brunson cannot be the only playmaker on the roster. I think while Randle does not have a great playoff history, I think his playmaking was missed in the playoffs. 100%. I mean, this is a guy who, there's just not a ton of guys, especially at the forward position, that can give you 25 and 10 and 5, and the ability to create off the dribble is, there's really 2 guys on the roster. Like Bridges has some of that ability, but obviously he was, if he's your third offensive option, I think you're really happy. You don't want to put a lot of playmaking burden on him. And Randle is clearly the second best playmaker on a roster that doesn't have a lot of it outside of, an all-NBA guy. And then he's a guy who's been all-NBA twice.
All right, Bontemps, you're up.
I got a really quick one. I don't think we even really need to discuss it. Ja Morant. Let's see what happens with Ja Morant. I don't think there's much else to be said. After the last couple of years, can he stay on the court? Can he produce at the same level? Can Memphis get back to where it was a couple of years ago? They're out for many reasons, don't really need to be stated. That's going to be one of the biggest questions of the season. Certainly very curious to see what he and they look like.
Well, honestly, that goes right into another guy that I've got on my list is Zach Edey. And they obviously made a big bet on Zach Edey. We've talked about he's the one guy in that lottery who looks like he's locked into a starting role on a team that has a chance to do some damage, and they really need him. And that combination, the Edey Ja tandem, is going to be fascinating. Exactly. Now, obviously, there's going to be a lot of pick and roll there. But how else are they going to use Edey? Is he going to get a lot of post touches? Is he going to kind of operate like I do in pickup ball a lot, which is watching back court? And then again, exactly how he performs defensively and how they protect him defensively is going to be fascinating. So yeah, I don't think the Boban comparison's not fair to Edey because he's a much more talented player. I'm not sure the Yao Ming, I'm curious to see how close he is to a version of Yao Ming. And then I don't know how Yao Ming would have fared in today's NBA.
I think the best comparison that I've heard is one Gavoni has brought up a bunch. Gavoni's obviously high in the draft, which is a bigger, better version of Jonas Valanciunas, potentially. Like a guy who mashes on the boards, Jonas isn't a small guy either. Obviously, he's a big dude, but
yeah.
Edey's huge. He's got a chance to give them a ton of rebounding, offensive rebounding. And like we've talked about before, the real question with him is if you watch him at Purdue, he couldn't ever leave the court. So he played 40 minutes every game and he never fouled, which is impressive as a big. But now he's probably going to play 20, 25 minutes. Now he's allowed to be more aggressive on defense. Does he become a guy who can get more blocks and make more defensive plays? And if he can, then all of a sudden he is an even more intriguing prospect. So yeah, I thought that pick was fascinating at the time. Fascinating to see how it goes. And yeah, those two guys together, they're going to play a big part in determining whether Memphis can really be in the mix in the West or not.
That Yao Ming comparison is amazing. If Yao Ming was in this draft, where would he have gone?
I think he would have gone
probably number
first.
one.
I don't think it would have been a question.
But
Zach Edey isn't nearly. Yao Ming was a guy who would have been shooting threes at 7'6" in today's NBA.
That's true, but he didn't. He didn't.
Well, he didn't because nobody did back then. But he was a terrific jump shooter.
But my point is, like a guy who, and Zach Edey's not 7'6", but he's 7'4", 300. A guy not only that height, but that size, that bulk, right, that height, who has that kind of skill, that kind of touch. There have not been many of them. One interesting thing about the Valanciunas comp is obviously Memphis had Valanciunas, and he was solid for them. But they moved him, to New Orleans in the trade that brought back Steven Adams, and they also moved up 7 spots for what ended up being a terrible draft pick move. Would have been great if they'd have picked the guy that New Orleans got at 17 instead of the guy they got at 10. If they'd have picked Trey Murphy instead of Zaire Williams, it would have been a great deal. But anyways, part of the reason, part of the logic of that deal was that they felt like Steven Adams was a better fit for them because he wasn't a guy who needed post touches. And hey, it's just like Porzingis obviously proved himself to be, or developed himself into being a great post player, post scorer in Boston. But it's just like the Mavericks didn't want to dump the ball down to Porzingis in the post because it took the ball out of Luka's hands. The Grizzlies didn't want to dump the ball down to Valanciunas in the post because it took the ball out of Ja's hands. So that will be interesting. Now, if Edey comes in and he's averaging 1.15, 1.2 points per post up, then the argument changes because you're no longer, because it's about, you don't want the ball out of Ja's hands because that's your most efficient offense.
Right.
So that whole thing will be interesting. But the Valanciunas comp, I see it. And also Memphis moved on from Valanciunas in part. Obviously, there's a lot of that went in that trade, but in part because of fit.
All right. I think it's my turn again.
It is.
Waiting to see if anybody disagrees. Okay. I'm going to say Jimmy Butler.
He was on my list too.
Another player going into the last year of his contract. Had brief, it sounds like, discussions with the Heat about a contract extension. Pat Riley said on the record at the end of his press conference in the spring, that ain't happening. And so Jimmy is highly motivated to have a big year. He's 35. The Heat finished 8th the last 2 years. And 2 years that have been plagued with injuries. Their big investment, Tyler Hero, has had a lot of injuries in that time. Jimmy hasn't, last year he played 60 games. And there was a bunch of games where he was sort of a late scratch with odd malady. I think in a 50-50 situation this year, I think you're more likely to see Jimmy play. That said, I think the Eastern Conference is highly competitive, and it has gotten more competitive while the Heat have kind of spun their wheels, even with the excellent draft pick of Jaquez. So I think it's fertile ground for Jimmy to have a big year, to try to get one last big contract from the Heat. And the Heat have shown throughout the Riley years, they will move off of players when they think that it's time, and they will pay players. Like, there are many examples of the Heat signing guys to questionable contracts. And, from giving Shaq the last contract that they gave him all the way to paying Dion Waiters. Like, you can see it on the gamut. But Jimmy Butler can believe that if he has a big year this year, he could get rewarded for it. And I think he has proven to be a difference-making player. And I think he's highly incentivized to be a difference-making player this year.
It's fertile. I think it's also potentially flammable. And
no question,
Jimmy has, let's just say, an explosive personality. And if it doesn't go right, it's got dangerous potential here. I'll just put it like that.
Yeah, I think the Heat have been outside the top 4 in the East for the last 5 years. They've made the conference finals or farther 3 of the last 5 years. I think the only other team to do that is the Celtics. So, in the whole league. So, like, there's obviously a wide range there in how their regular season and playoffs have gone. Jimmy's obviously been at the center of that. He's approaching his mid-30s. He didn't get the extension. There's a lot of stuff going on there, and I agree. They're going to be a really interesting team. Since they haven't come up yet on the pod, I will bring up the Lakers. Fairly obvious person, I think, this year is our former colleague and our pal, JJ Redick, the new coach of the Lakers. Again, sort of like Ja, this one's pretty simple. How's it going to go with JJ coaching the Lakers? I don't think there's any question. Even if it wasn't the Lakers, people would be interested in what JJ is doing. And now he's coaching LeBron and AD, and, whatever happens with Bronny James, all the stuff going on with the Lakers. What happens with JJ and him coaching the team is at the center of all of it. Again, I don't think there's a need to go into it too much, but it's going to be fascinating to see how it goes.
Yeah, and Jeannie Buss was on local radio out there last week, and one of the things she said was, we have to give him time to establish what he wants to establish. Basically, give him time to grow, which I agree. When you hire a rookie head coach who has literally no experience outside of, middle schoolers, coaching middle schoolers, yes, that's true. But you hired this guy to coach a superstar in his 22nd season. Yeah, I mean, there ain't a whole lot of time to grow here. It's kind of a perform right away type of situation you got there.
This is the Laker paradox. You've got Rob Pelinka holding on, and I guess Jeannie Buss to a certain extent, holding on to these longer term draft picks to protect the franchise. You've got Pelinka coming out and announcing, we are really going to invest in player development, that's easy to say and hard to do. And even if you do it beautifully, it takes a long time, not only to develop those players, that's obvious. It takes a long time to build a good development program. You don't just,
that's something you don't just flip a switch and have that happen.
Yeah. You don't just announce it. You got to find guys, you got to install policies and stuff like that. And, it's a perfectly reasonable thing and a smart thing for an organization to say in this new environment, which is the reason Pelinka said it. But it's a multi-year plan. You hire not just a first-time head coach, a first-time coach. Mm-hmm. And if you believe in that guy, then make the hire. They clearly believe in him. They made the hire. And when you hire a first-time coach in any sport, but particularly the NBA, it is baked in that the guy is going to make mistakes. And he's going to cost you games in the short term. Eric Spoelstra will talk about things he, totally botched in his first couple of years. Brad Stevens, who was one of the great immediate NBA coaches of this generation, will talk about how much he screwed up in his first year. Even if you're great at it, you're going to screw up. You bake that in. So you have the Lakers all going this way. But as you say, MacMahon, clearly LeBron's, almost 40. And by the way, AD is 31.
Yeah.
And I don't want to say you're wasting years, but so
well, it's like we've talked about. They
rub.
have those two guys and they've largely been irrelevant for years, which is sort of impossible to do.
Yeah, they won a title, and they did go to the West Finals a couple years ago, but most competitive sweep in NBA history.
Yes, but like we've talked about, they had some fortunate breaks along the way that year, and they never have recovered from the Westbrook trade. Like, that's the fork in the road moment. From that moment forward, they just haven't recovered.
Right, but even beyond all that, if you look at where they're at, they're sort of two minds right now. And I just think, actions over words. I'll go back to what we talked about a little bit ago. The Atlanta Hawks, when they made this trade for DeJounte Murray, the prime asset in that trade with the Pelicans was to get the Lakers 2025 pick. Yes, there were other pieces in it. Larry Nance is a guy who can help them, play multiple positions. Dyson Daniels is a second draft guy, basically taking a guy a couple years into the league, was a lottery pick, great size, blah, blah, blah.
Got a couple of picks.
They did it because they don't have control of the 20. They're not in the 2025 draft because they owe the pick to the Spurs. And they are like, you know what? We can get our hands they're wagering that the Lakers are going to be a lottery team.
And they're wagering. I mean, they're really wagering that AD and LeBron James aren't going to play a combined 147 games, which they did last year, and they were a play-in team. If one of them misses significant time, there's a very good chance they're outside the top 10. And if they're outside the top 10, you get a free roll in a lottery in a loaded draft.
I don't
know.
They
just jumped up from 10 to 1 this year. So who knows?
And LeBron had some quotes. LeBron sees all this, of course. And, another thing is going to be the whole Bronny thing and whatever that is going to be as a distraction. But, the way LeBron approached the summer, the physical condition he was in, the way he poured it all out to win that gold. And he even said, he didn't ever articulate directly, but he's like, I don't know how often I'm going to be able to do this again. That's sort of a tacit admission that he doesn't know what's going to happen with the Lakers.
Well, listen, I don't think we can discuss the Lakers without mentioning Christian Wood's recent Instagram story. I'm back, y'all, and I'm coming back next season with a vengeance.
Well,
because he had an option in his contract.
For the minimum, which was a wise decision to pick up.
He's lucky he had the option.
Great negotiating. Shrewd job by the agent there.
All right. Whose turn is it?
I think it's my turn. Can I go? I think I'll go with a combo deal. And I'm surprised Wendy didn't put this combo platter on the table because he discovered both these gentlemen. Both these gentlemen. And I'm going with 1-2 in last year's Rookie of the Year. I'm not going to call it a race, Rookie of the Year voting. And look, Wembanyama is the most intriguing player maybe in the league just because the possibilities seem limitless. We've never seen a guy like this. What's next? And especially now he's going to have solid point guard play alongside him pretty much all the time. How great can this kid be right now? How much can he grow offensively? How many blocks is he going to average per game? How many 5x5 performances is he going to have? And then Chet Holmgren. And with Chet, it's a different thing because he is playing for the Western Conference favorite, according to all the betting odds. Clearly a team that has championship aspirations, and there's going to be some changing of the roles. I am assuming that Hartenstein will start alongside him. I haven't seen anything of
I think it'll be a night to night thing. I think if they're playing bigger teams, I think Hartenstein will start. I think if they're playing smaller teams, I think he'll come off the bench and they'll start Chet at center.
Well, and so that'll be interesting. I still think the majority of Chet's minutes will come at center. Say he plays 30 minutes per game. I think it'll be 17, 18 at center, 12 or 13 at power forward. But, there's some adjustment, and there's going to have to be the ability to adjust, not just game to game, but like, sub by sub, how's he going to fare at the power forward? And then there's this idea of, hey, there's a lot more for Chet offensively. He has playmaking ability that they haven't fully tapped into, so his development offensively is going to be fascinating as well.
Last 10 games Wembanyama played, and I understand that you see some wonky stuff at the end of the season,
Sure.
but by the end of last season, because I think some people like rolled their eyes because he couldn't make a jumper until the new year. Last 10 games of last season, 25 points, 12 rebounds, almost 7 assists a game on 30.
Blocks?
Oh my God, I didn't even look it up. I mean,
yeah. I'll look that up. Go on, give us the percent.
Yeah, 33% on threes.
I'm pulling it up right now.
So 33% on three. He shot 33% on threes after the All-Star break last year. I understand that's not going to blow people away, but he is 7'5". And he didn't crack. I think he was shooting like 27% before the new year last year on threes. So I mean, one of the big things about the end of the season was his development in playmaking. The last 5 games, he averaged 7 assists. What he was doing at the end, like he was taking flight. One of the most memorable nights of the last year for me wasn't a playoff game, wasn't an Olympic game, although there was some memorable ones in those too, was the night where Brunson scored 60. Was it 60 or like 60?
62, I think.
Yeah, it was because it was an overtime. He scored 50 in regulation. Brunson had 60 and Victor went for 40 and 20. And the Spurs won.
Dude, they averaged 4.5 blocks and 1.5 steals per game after the All-Star break. I mean, he has the potential to do things defensively that we have never seen. He gets 2 shots to block them that, like, guys are like, I cannot believe that was even a contested shot. Like, he blocks jump shots and threes as a help defender that is just like, are you serious? And then offensively.
Yeah, I mean, the 2 things with him to watch this year for me, obviously the defense is unquestionable, right? It's how much of the ball handling is he doing? Because like we've talked about, that at least for now is a real deficiency. Again, he's 7'5". It's not a surprise. And the shooting, like he wants to shoot a lot of threes. If he's going to shoot a lot of threes and shoot around 30%, that's not good. Like he's got to become a good 3-point shooter. Right now, he's a bad 3-point shooter. Again, his shot looks good. I think in time, he's going to make a lot of shots. But even you go back to the Olympics, right? He didn't shoot great during the Olympics. Like, and this is not, I'm not sitting here saying, to be clear for the aggregators, that Victor's overrated or isn't good or any of that kind of stuff. But for where he wants to get to, those are the 2 things to really watch. And this year, if he becomes a 37% 3-point shooter for the season, then there's a very good chance MacMahon wins his bet, right? Like if he can take real steps there, if he doesn't have as many turnovers, doesn't handle the ball quite as much, becomes more of a play finisher, those are the kind of things that could determine whether this team wins 30 games and they're 13th in the West, or they win 38 games and they're 10th in the West or 11th in the West or whatever. Yeah. Like but that's what makes him so fascinating. He can do everything. And look, Chet, like you said, MacMahon, if he develops more as an offensive player and takes significant strides in that area, that could be the difference between the Thunder losing the second round like they did last year or winning the title. So the stakes are higher for him because of the situation they are at as a team. But yeah, both those guys, and you mentioned it, including Derek Lively, might as well throw him in too. The whole I-35 deal. Like all 3 of those guys, it's going to be super fun to watch them in their second years and see how they develop and see what it means for their respective teams.
Well, and the Mavs are really putting a lot on Lively on the defensive end of the floor. I've mentioned and I've heard him compared to a Joakim Noah type. In other words, not just kind of your traditional paint-bound big man, but a guy who, and we saw him like switching on Anthony Edwards.
I haven't heard that one, but I like it. I like that one.
I heard that one from one of our guys there.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
Just in terms of being able, like, Dude,
It's hard to impress Bontemps.
one of the
Yeah.
critical plays of that Minnesota series that nobody talks about was when he got switched on to Anthony Edwards and could do nothing with it, threw the ball out of bounds when he couldn't get a shot up. And of course, nobody remembers it because the next play was when Luka, put one in their eye and had a little chit chat with him. But this is a team that's going to have defensive limitations on the perimeter, talking about the Mavericks, and they need Lively to be a major, major impact type of player on that end of the floor, in addition to being just an ideal, pick and roll partner for Luka with the ability to make some plays out of the short roll. And then again, if he can hit threes, that's cherry on the Sunday. Real quick on Chet though, I don't necessarily know that the Thunder need him to take a leap offensively to be able to, elevate into winning the West, maybe being a championship team. I think they definitely need him to be able to maintain his production. He tailed off pretty badly at the end of last year. His two worst three-point shooting months of the season were March and April. And then in the playoffs, he was even worse, 26%. And look, the guy played every single game, every minute at the 5 in his rookie year. Like, it's understandable that he went down.
Yeah, but they're going to play him and Hartenstein together.
Right. I think that reduces the wear and tear on him. Yeah. He's had another summer. Nobody questions this dude's work ethic. Like, he's going to put everything into it. And if he just maintains being a high 30% three-point shooter, that could be the difference. The other thing is, I would, as far as guys who have a chance to make an offensive leap on that roster and future max guys, I think Jalen Williams might be your better bet. He made a pretty nice leap last year from 14 to 19. I wouldn't be surprised if he's somewhere, in the 22, 23 point per game range this year. I think he is a guy who I believe is blossoming as a playmaker and scorer.
Well, we often see guys third year is a big year. I'm going to pick an intriguing team. We're just throwing the rules to the wind.
It's people for a reason. You can go in any direction you want.
New Orleans Pelicans.
All right.
I was just gonna bring up. That's what I was gonna bring up. So here we go.
I had Zion next on my list, so let's go.
Well, I had Zion and Brandon Ingram as a tandem, so perfect.
Right. So so obviously you've got Zion and Ingram. Zion was having a very good year last year.
Can I make one quick addendum on that?
Yeah.
Zion was healthy. He was very productive last year. Didn't make the All-Star team. Didn't make an All-NBA team. If you'd said Zion Williamson had the year he had a couple years ago and played 70-plus games, you'd be like, oh, he's going to make All-NBA. He's going to be. He was sort of
but then he got hurt
a forgotten guy. Well, no, he got hurt in the playoffs, but I'm saying even during the year, he was sort of a forgotten guy at this point.
Right. All right. So we've talked about Zion at length. We don't need to go. Zion is there. Brandon Ingram, who is another one of these guys going into the last year of his contract, has not worked out a deal with the Pelicans, and I'm not sure if one is in the offing in the short term.
Well, I would sort of say he fits the Trae Young bill too, right? Where like they certainly they don't have a center on their team. I think there's a decent chance Zion's going to start at center, and that's because in part there was not a deal to be made to move Brandon Ingram to get them back a center.
Well, this is one of the reasons
Ingram, he'd be gone.
Right.
Well, part of the reason why the market is tight is because he's made it clear he wants the max.
Exactly.
And it's the same reason that the Pelicans don't want to give it to him. Another team doesn't want to import that discomfort, because he still had a pretty good year last year. He shot 50% or 49% from the field. His scoring was down, but he wasn't the same impact player he was in previous years. He's a guy who can do multiple things on offense. He handles the ball. Yeah. He can initiate. He's a valuable offensive guy, incredible length. So he's very hard to defend. I've covered him,
but he's a 35% 3-point shooter who doesn't get to the line and doesn't shoot a lot of threes.
And he's also routinely had injury issues where, and not just one thing, multiple different things. And
Has not played 65 games since his rookie year. I just saw that looking at his stats, which is pretty wild.
Right. He's made one All-Star game. One All-Star game in what? How many years?
8 seasons.
8 seasons. This is stress max territory. Actually, I don't even really think he's not a max player at this point. I mean, he's just not.
No, but
well, if he was, he'd have an extension for one.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. So this is why the whole team is intriguing to me. As you guys as we've talked about before, they don't have a center. So they're going to be playing weird. You got Ingram with the contract situation to deal with. They got to get Trae Murphy taken care of. I would assume that they would, but he's extension eligible. You've got to get him locked in. He wants paid. I don't blame him. Other people around the league excellent shooting wing have gotten huge deals, and he should expect it. And as of right now, if I'm not mistaken, the Pelicans are into the tax.
They are a couple million in. Yep.
And I don't think anybody in the league believes that they're going to finish in the tax. So the deals
never paid it before.
That's right. The deals that they make during the season are going to be, at least in some way, to reduce payroll. So all of these things, there's a modicum of pressure on Willie Green to show, where he's at and that he can get the most out of this team. I think all of these things are factors. The Pelicans did something very unusual and never announced it. They gave Willie Green a contract extension after his first season. Very unheard of, especially for a guy who was a first-time head coach. And rightly so. Did a great job coming out of the gates. And then never announced it. And I think probably because they didn't want people to judge them for doing that. But he's also got to get this roster to develop or to play well. And there's some challenges. There's some tough things that, they've given him a lot of talent. And then you've got the situation where you're bringing in DeJounte Murray, great import of talent. Yeah. But you got to see how Willie Green and those guys adjust to putting him with CJ McCollum.
Well,
and how that fits.
Okay, you've got 3 guys that all need the ball. Zion can space it some vertically, but like DeJounte Murray, not a great spacer if he doesn't have the ball in his hands. Brandon Ingram, not a great spacer if he doesn't have the ball in his hands. You're not guarding Zion if he's standing out at the 3-point line. Like when you make the DeJounte Murray trade,
you're not guarding Herb Jones. Not that he's going to have the ball in his hands, but you're not really guarding him either.
And he improved as a 3-point shooter last year, but
even still,
right, you're going to live with that.
Still going to have to make him test it, yeah, for sure.
And so when you went and you made the trade for DeJounte Murray, you're like, okay, let's see what they get for Ingram, and then see how the pieces fit. And Ingram's still there.
Yeah, and certainly seems like they're going to go into the season starting DeJounte Murray, Herb Jones, Trae Murphy, Brandon Ingram, and Zion Williamson, which is a fascinating lineup on a lot of levels. And, they are a fascinating team. I'm glad you just said them as a team because they've got so much stuff going on. And again, we're talking about the Western Conference, as deep as it is. There's a lot of pressure on them, I think, to continue to build some momentum. And, look, like it's going to be a fascinating year on a lot of fronts, up to and including what happens with the roster. Because again, they've never paid the tax. They're like $3 million in right now after signing Javonte Green, which I thought was a good end of the roster signing. He's a guy who can definitely help them too. And they've got talent. So, let's see if they can push forward or if they're going to settle in a little bit.
Yeah, Zion at the 5 last year. I looked it up. Their net rating with him as the 5 was like +3 and change, 3 and pretty, 3.6, something like that. But it's a different deal if that's your primary lineup and you're going against other teams starting/closing lineups than it is if you can kind of, spot
your spots.
Especially if you're trying to keep that guy healthy, especially if that's one of their goals. All right, we got to bring this home. You guys want to both go kind of quick here with one more each?
I got one real quick one, sort of along the same lines as you. The Bucks in general. Like, you've got Doc Rivers there after taking on a job nobody wanted, in his words, last year. Damian Lillard made the All-Star team, but did not have the impact they certainly hoped for. There's always pressure there to win. They lose in the first round 2 years in a row. You've mentioned it, Brian. Giannis was not put on the list for best player in the league in the straw poll of executives. So the offseason survey I did, where is he going to be at this year? There's a lot of pressure in Milwaukee, and we saw Philly get better. We saw the Knicks get better. Celtics are still awesome. You got the Cavs, the Magic, the Pacers. There's a lot of talent.
Yeah, the Magic got better.
And where does Milwaukee fit into that? And if they don't progress again this year, what does that mean for their future, for Giannis, for Dame, for Doc Rivers, for all these guys a year from now? They're obviously they've won a title, but I think they're sort of the East version of the Pelicans as a group.
Brook Lopez was in trade rumors for a lot of
last year, his contract. Chris Middleton had surgery on both ankles this summer. He's a critical piece.
As of right now,
not going on there.
I have been told firmly that they are not trading Brook. So, but the season's a long season, but I have been told firmly. And by the way, so is Brook. Brook heard some of the rumors and said, "Hey, what's going on?" They're like, "No, we're not trading you." So, just FYI, I'll just toss that in.
I will say this: Brook Lopez has been the perfect center to pair with Giannis, a guy who shuts down the paint on one end and opens it up on the other end by spacing the floor.
They are going to change their defense, their defensive structure, and I'm not adept enough at the X's and O's to say how, but one of the things Doc Rivers did is he hired Greg Buckner away. He had been let go by the Cavs, and Buckner was part of the guys who schemed the Cavs defense, playing really big the last couple of years with JB Bickerstaff. So I think one of the things that they're going to do as a team is bring some concepts that change their defense a little bit. There's always a lot of focus on how they're playing the pick and roll, what they're doing with Brook, etc. And that was one of the reasons why people thought Brook might be available, because it kind of got out there that they were going to structurally change their defense. I was like, oh, does that mean they're changing, one of their best defenders? But I am told that the structure will change, but in terms of personnel with Brook, obviously we're now in late August. That hasn't happened yet, but just to follow up on that.
Well, and that leads me right into where I wanted to end. Cavs Corner.
And it's now time for Cavs Corner with Brian Windhorst.
Cavs Corner. Hey, coming to Akron.
Who are you picking for that?
St. Vincent, St. Mary, September 13, when he's got his old Letterman's jacket from the debate club.
Excuse me, sir. Excuse me. I won 3 letters on the varsity golf team in high school. You can laugh, but
did you win? Did you win in a real sport? Golf's not a sport. Golf.
You can say whatever you want. I had a Letterman jacket. You can make fun.
How many did you have, MacMahon?
11.
I think I had 10 or so.
Because I didn't get shipped off to this boarding school till after football season. Also, it was a little bit different. The whole enrollment was 200. But anyway,
did they have? Did you have a Letterman jacket at that school?
We didn't until we went to the state championship game in basketball my sophomore year. Then they bought the basketball team letter jacket.
Oh, that's cool. Nice. How nice.
I think one of my daughters has mine. Anyways, or had, who knows. So Evan Mobley, and look, we've talked about it a lot. He's still power forward, apparently. He's going to have to make the leap offensively that he hadn't even made a hop yet, but he's going to have to make a leap offensively for a contending window to really open up if he's going to play power forward. And, we'll see. And then he's in, signed that Fun Max extension with some potential escalators. Again, I could see Defense Player of the Year much more than I could see All NBA.
Well, and I was going to say for the Cavs, Kenny Atkinson, because they hired Kenny Atkinson. And as Brian has repeatedly pointed out, they haven't really done much else with the team. They bring back basically the whole group. Obviously, we'll see what happens with Isaac Okoro, but they're still, you could say they're still lacking a little bit in wing defense, whether they have Isaac Okoro out there or not, because he's not a great 3-point shooter. And so you can't really have him out there at times in the highest leverage situations. But they made a bet on the talent on the roster being good enough, and that by bringing in a new coach who can maybe help Evan Mobley get better offensively, you can make the pieces fit better. That is what can make them take a leap. So let's see what Kenny Atkinson can do with that.
And as you guys pointed out, and it's not necessarily instructive, but it is interesting that Kenny Atkinson was the assistant coach with the French national team this summer, and they were really struggling playing double big with Gobert and Wembanyama. And when they went to a smaller lineup, de-emphasizing Gobert essentially, although they did play double big during the gold medal game for several stretches, but they also played without both of them on the court. They were, if that was an NBA game, we would be breaking that game down for weeks.
Yeah, they played without him a lot more than any of us certainly would have expected going into the Olympics.
Right. And so, look, I am not aware of how big of a voice Kenny had on the lineups of that team. I'm not trying to pretend like I do, but it just is interesting that the team that Kenny spent the summer with ran into some problems, even with two all-star level big men out there, as certainly the Cavs might think that they have, and Jared Allen, who has been an all-star, and Evan Mobley, who they're paying like an all-star. So,
and Kenny Atkinson is a guy who's heavily influenced by analytics, is a guy who is coach from Mike D'Antoni, is a believer in bombing away from the 3-point line like that. It's not like he's a guy who's thinking, oh yeah, we got to go back to the 90s basketball wise. So like, again, if you believe in Evan Mobley, and there's every reason to believe in him as a talent overall, like this is a coach who has, in theory, with his history of player development, with his belief system in terms of shooting the ball, this is what you want to see if you're a Cavs fan, for a guy who can maybe get this guy to become the offensive player he needs to become for them to be a championship level team. Because like I've said a bunch, I think you guys agree, their path to being a championship level team is if Donovan Mitchell's their second best player. And that means Evan Mobley has to take a very big leap. And I think he's got the athletic gifts to do that, but he's got to get there. And we'll see if Kenny Atkinson can help him do so.
You're talking about the improvements in the East. You're talking about, the Cavs are under some pressure too. Philly's improvement affects the Cavs. Milwaukee, obviously, when they're at full power, they're a better team than the Cavs, I believe. And Orlando is improving. Miami is, under some pressure. The Knicks are kind of already ahead of them, obviously. But
Indiana finished behind them last year.
Indiana definitely, they struggled with Indiana during the regular season last year. So, and they didn't change the roster. The roster is essentially the exact same. And so their only ability to deal with that pressure from behind is to improve the hand that they have. And so that's why they hired Kenny Atkinson. So we'll see. All right.
Real quick. There's been some online chatter about booing Bontemps at the live show in Akron. Some of those bitter little Cavs fans want to let the USWB have it. And I'm just here.
MacMahon knows all about bitter fans.
I'm just here to say, if Bontemps is booed, I will join in.
What a shock.
This is going to be like, first off, the live show, which you can get tickets for at hoopcollective.eventbrite.com, is a celebration of fun. It's going to be in September, for crying out loud. Everybody's 0-0.
And there's a lot to be excited about if you're a Cavs fan. Yeah. Big Donovan Mitchell extension this summer. There's a lot of optimism.
Yeah. It's a celebration. It's of the most famous alum of St. Vincent St. Mary, Bryant Windhorst.
That's right.
Yeah, right.
The leader of Cavs Corner.
Yeah. But anyway, it'll be a good night. All right. This has been an intriguing podcast. Thank you to Jackson, our producer. Thank you to MacMahon and Bontemps. Thank you for listening and watching. We'll talk to you soon.
Adios, amigos.